Welcome to May's Terraform and Azure community call. Uh, Good to see this crew. It's a little bit smaller today, but just want to open up the floor first. I have some stuff I'd like to cover, but if anyone would like to go ahead, we can kind of kick off with any topics that people have. I may or may not have a demo that's failing me right now that I'm trying to spin up. So while that's happening, does anybody have any topics? Does anybody have anything top of mind? Anything that they would like to chat about? As always, this is more of a practitioner's call than anything, so feel free to use this time and space however you please.
Yeah, Stephen, I'll throw a couple questions out to the group. We've got a team that's written a lot of stuff in ARM and Bicep in the past. They're wanting to move it all to Terraform because that's the agreed upon configuration language of choice. Has anybody attempted using Copilot or anything to say, hey, here's my Bicep file or my ARM file, go write me all the Terraform for it with any amount of success? I can make that much more difficult by saying the resources should be created using our modules if they exist for that resource, like say a storage account, use our module, and don't create the bare Azure RM resource, create the call using our module. I think that's going to require like a skill probably to be created, I think, to do that. But just in general, with any amount of success, has anybody said, hey, here's a ARM file, go create me a Terraform file with all the same resources, and had much luck? They say they're not having much luck. I haven't attempted it myself.
The tricky thing is your requirement to use your own modules. That makes it bespoke, as you say. Had reasonable success as long as you accept having to do some tidy up afterwards with going towards, say, AVM as an example. So one of the reasons for picking that would be there's some pre-existing work inside there to do with writing code and modules which are aligned. So things like using the TF plugin scheme, so TF plugin schema, and various other sort of little shell utilities inside there, which helps basically looking at pre-existing state and bringing it in. The other approach that you could consider is to use AZTF export or similar to actually just go straight to the portal itself, because that's quite a well-established flow as well. Again, you've got that same practicality of that'll give you very vanilla Terraform, sometimes not particularly awesome Terraform, and then you just need to have the skill basically to land that into something which is the form that you want.
Yeah.
If you've got a limited number of components, that sounds plausible there.
Yeah, these are full implementations that are fairly complex. So they're looking for the easy button. I've told them, you're not going to land at the finish line with anything. You need to pick which amount of cleanup you're willing to take on, using the export, using this Copilot to try and convert what you got, taking it back to raw Azure ARM resources without modules or anything like that. You're gonna have to pick which cleanup you choose to take, kind of thing. So yeah,
you have to do a bunch of imports too. It's like not just that Terraform, but getting that imported properly.
Yeah, the imports honestly aren't too bad. I actually imported like 60,000 resources a couple weekends ago. It took me 2 or 3 hours to do. I had Copilot write all the code for the imports. It was actually pretty good. The biggest problem I had was I ran out of context window, and towards the end it got real sloppy, surprisingly bad, to the fact that I had to start over and kind of break things out a little bit so that it wouldn't fall outside the window, and then it did just fine. But yeah, the imports weren't too bad. But yes, that work does exist. Yes.
Jeremy, you already have the reference module, right? And is it essentially identical architecture to the module? You just want to have the code be rewritten to match the module's conventions, if you will?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. I haven't tried anything yet. What I was going to try maybe later on, probably next week, was to bring those modules into the context window in my VS Code, and also have the ARM and say write my Terraform using the modules and see how it did just at that level and see where I landed. I don't have a lot of confidence on it, but we'll see.
I think,
I
like
bet
you
that
said before, if you use some of the skills as well, and maybe like the CLI, just to say, because I'm not using we have our own modules, but so I'm not in the ARM bicep issue, but I'm at least going to say, hey, I want to rewrite some stuff, but go and look at this module repo, and you've got, the Azure DevOps skill, and that's where our modules are. Go and read through everything there and then kind of replicate that. And then also go and use the Azure CLI or the Azure MCP and see what's on the platform and pull that down to do an assessment, and then start to get an idea and learn, do it on a small scale to see maybe what scripts and skills you could kind of pull in till you get something that matches. But it might take some, back and forth on a small scale, but I probably feasible.
Yeah.
It's
That's
possibly
the
an
other
opportunity
ask.
to think of.
Yeah, that was the other ask today, actually, by one of the teams, was how can we upskill our teams faster on Terraform, to write them the way we want them written with our modules. And so that's the other reason I was going to go look at a skill was, hey, if I can set up a skill and all they need to say is, I need a storage account, and it knows to go get our module and write it in reference to that.
That's exactly what we did.
Yes.
Because there was also a big frustration that we use custom modules, and we just said like, here, this is like the repository on GitHub, and just go and use like init without the backend, and just grab the modules for whatever you have, and just from there just figure out what you need to write in our style, using our guidelines. It's really great. Like, we deploy complete landing zones with just a single prompt of a few
That's
lines,
great.
and
That's
it's
cool.
just a template, like an example, and it literally goes into it reads our VNets and our subnet configuration from both the Terraform code that we already have in our main branch, and it live checks everything out, and then it like looks up the right IP address, IP segments to use, etc. It figures out the tagging. It queries. It uses a script that queries a ServiceNow CMDB to get like application service name, business owners, etc. Cost centers. It gets everything from the CMDB down, and says like, this is what you can use. It's really great working with skills like that.
Does anybody have published docs on kind of how they walked through some of that? I'm sure you can't hand over the bread and butter and secret sauce. So
It's markdown files. It's not crazy usually. I would say it depends on your scenario, but you could probably spin up like an MCP, or you can use the MCP. By the way, we are now on the Azure MCP server underneath the Azure MCP server for Terraform, so you could use that. You could fetch some documentation. You can link it up, build something along those lines that tries to kind of do that whole work.
Cool.
I think so that's why I was asking the component approach, because even though you've got a lot of resources, how many components does it distill down to? And if you're in a relatively normal sort of space, you're using unusual components, it's probably a relatively small subset, and then you can take it with the approach that sort of Robin was suggesting of targeting things that way. That's quite a great scalable way to do it. The problem with looking for public resources of people who've done it before is that the actual implementation aspects tend to be quite company specific. So you get the ways, but not the secret source, right? So
yeah,
that's also like the problem that I was thinking about. Like, I can show you what we have. I can show you the skill that we have, but it's so specific to our environment, because it says things like, yeah, only deploy in West or North Europe. It's like our environments are like named this specific way, like all that kind of stuff, right? So it's very specific to how our repository is built, etc. So yeah, that wouldn't really help much.
Yeah.
But I also just started with just like, here, this is like an example of how we would like deploy a landing zone, and then just start with like, hey, start building a skill, and then just like iterate over it and test it out. It really took me like, yeah, not really that long.
The other consideration as you're going through this pain is just think about the scope of what you're deploying. I don't know what you're doing at the moment, but if you've got, say, a TerraLift sort of model, with operational challenges that can bring, maybe that's an opportunity to split things up, and that can help with things like the context window as well. It's a great opportunity to reconsider the architecture.
Yeah.
We also like pull in lots of sub skills for specific parts, like we have a specific subskill for like network addressing, one for like how our file structure is done and stuff. So it really pulls in exactly what it needs when it starts to build it.
It's awesome.
And Robin, were you able to, like, was that just a dev test experiment, or did you actually get that in prod, like, with downtimes and stuff avoided?
We use this for deploying new landing zones. So it's all like before it actually goes live to prod, of course. But yeah, we deploy everything with it by now. And it's so great that like last year it took us like 1 or 2 days to get like a landing zone fully operational. And now it's like just waiting for the prompt to finish, like 10 minutes. It is completely insane, like the amount of speed that we're getting from this.
It's incredible.
It might sound a little bit scary, but I do have an environment now where I've got Azure DevOps and Azure written in Terraform that I don't even know. I just work through the agent window and let it go to town. So I got it working how I wanted, updated all the security and created all the skills and prompts so I can just do slash commands. I've not really essentially end-to-end review the code the agent has. So it's pretty impressive what it can do as long as you just push it in the right direction. And a bit of Andre Karpathy's ethos in there to, make small changes only when they're needed as a underlying everything skill.
Yeah, and in the end, it all depends on like you really need to check all the work that the agent has done before you, of course, like even go to plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not like we're just like typing the name in and just like YOLO.
Yeah, it didn't happen overnight. It is in production, but it was a lot of babysitting along the way. But it's pretty impressive what's available through, all the work with the Azure MCP and the Terraform that's there already and things like that.
Yeah, we are. I'm giving up on getting my web app working. It decided it just doesn't want to. It's a little shy today, but we're working on something that we can generally interface for all of you in that sort of brownfield way. Stu kind of mentioned the export scenario on the MCP, so we're trying to see, can we actually build out a general set of skills that essentially takes you from that export experience today with raw code and all the ugliness, and can we actually get somewhere? Can we get to a place where the code looks good and there's no creates, there's no recreates, there's no updates, there's just imports. And if that's the case, then everybody's happy and we all kind of can. I'd be curious to see how many different ways we can see how that gets screwed up, because I feel like brownfield is truly not a one size fits all issue, but it seems like we're closer than ever to solving that problem, and it definitely seems that you all are on that same page. So that's good to know.
It's the model that we're following as well. Import the resources to bring them into the current ways of working, because that only allows you to take over existing resources which are not potentially managed by IAC, but it also allows you to lifecycle your own work as well. That's the other consideration. Previously, when you've been doing this sort of stuff, you had like, let's take an example of subscription vending. I think with looking at previous engagements I've done, I think I was with a customer for a number of years, and we went through about 3 iterations of how subscription vending was done, and there was hundreds and hundreds of subscriptions in there, all on sort of slightly different versions because of that, of that requirement basically to sort of you don't go back and touch the things if there's no business value, right? And there's no business value until you need to use functionality in the later versions, so you just end up with legacy versions. So it's not only the day 2 problem, it's the day 200 and the day 400 problem. You sort of, with this import methodology, that's a really cool way to actually bring the capability across to it and keep everything evergreen, and aligned to the code. That's kind of where that Git ape thing that I dropped in the chat sort of is thinking as well. That's very alpha, but the concept being that it's, I'd hate to say the code doesn't matter, because I think the code does matter. I think if you don't have a good foundation, I think it depends on the company and depends on the customer. But in many cases, the code does matter, because you need to be able to maintain it. You need to be able to reason about it and understand what's happening in an outage and all the rest of it. So, but then, if you can constrain it in a way around existing guardrails like policy and that sort of thing, and then you're just reviewing alignment to that, then it's another way of thinking about the same problem. Not quite, I think, I wouldn't trust it in production right now, but it's an interesting direction.
All right, should we test it live? Anybody want to see me fail a live demo?
Always.
Always. Nothing good like watching a live demo fail, right? Okay. I will share my screen. Let's see here.
One of my favorite things to do is to debug on a stage.
Oh no. That screen. I have too many screens now. All right, so I built this very complicated demo here. It's just a live clock. But what I'm going to try to do now is use this exact export skill POC that I put together. And it's going to try to export everything using the Azure ARM provider. I use PowerShell scripts that AI wrote to spin this up. So if it goes wrong, I blame AI for not authoring the code properly. But there's a few things that AZTF export provides. One of the big things that's nice is that we have the import blocks. The other thing is that it has the understanding to some extent of all the properties. So the main goal here is, can we keep this thing running and the whole time make sure that nothing goes down? Theoretically, right, I think you all are familiar with this, but the whole benefit of export is it's read-only. You don't actually have to make any changes until you apply. But the apply process is where things get interesting, because you're trying to say, hey, can we actually go and import this into Terraform state without it blowing up on us? Right now, we're currently running that. My goal, alongside everybody else on my product group side, is basically solving the brownfield solution. We've gotten 70, 75, 80% of the way there. Now I'm like, frick it, can we just shoot straight for 100 and actually get things productionized? Obviously, I'm not saying 100 without any sorts of edits from your side, but I think if the code is working and looks like real Terraform with like a .var or variables.tf and an output.tf and all the correct coding practices, heck, if it can even target a module as a like 2.0 step, then that would be wonderful. It's going to run for a while there, so I'm just going to stop sharing while it's going, but you can trust that the clock is ticking away while we are chatting here. And I do think this is like a real possibility in the future. And it sounds like everybody else here is kind of thinking about it too. And I'll come back and interrupt people once that does finish. The other question I had, Jeremy, you mentioned how you were talking about how there are folks on your team who aren't following the right practices. Uh, are they just like newer to DevOps? Are they people who aren't necessarily as familiar with modules and how to author on a platform sort of situation?
Say we don't have a lot of good. I'd say we're very kindergarten, man. We say, hey, you need to write this in Terraform, but you need to go to this wiki to find our modules. You need to go to this repo to see examples how to write those. You need to go to, if you're not really sure what resources you need, they're just very, very junior engineers across the board.
Yep.
But they're expected to write code. And so how can I take away the years of just knowing where things are and placing it in front of them, you know, with an agent or something that already knows where the modules are at, already knows what parameters are required,
Yeah.
already knows, you know, what naming conventions we're supposed to be using. And for the resources that we don't have in modules, following the naming conventions that we have, you know, documented, and don't deploy standard and basic SKUs because they're not approved, and you know, whatever it might be, right? Those kinds of things that they wouldn't know. I had actually had somebody this week deploying Terraform, and they had built their own backend and a storage account and were managing their own state. It was like, no, dude, we have an enterprise backend that we're using. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. But I mean, they'd carried it to the finish line because that's what they knew. That's new. They were taking it all the way. But
I mean, sometimes it feels like people don't know what they don't know. Has anybody tried to
exactly.
Something that's top of mind for me right now is like there is this skill gap that exists today. There are people who have obviously, like in this room, been building modules for years, know what a well-architected framework is, know how to store your state files, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are like the teams where, hey, like Joe Schmo suddenly had to become a DevOps engineer and doesn't know anything about how that works. Has anybody, I guess, had to tackle that where you're trying to like ramp up in that sort of situation like Jeremy has? Has anyone found success? Or even right now too, like, have you been able to like create an agent that basically says, okay, here is all of Jeremy Myers' knowledge, and I'm now going to shove it at my team so that they inherit all the correct logic or guardrails by default? I'm just curious what folks have kind of experienced or seen.
So I've been through this pre-AI, the old school way of working with teams who are new to Terraform, new to DevOps, and sort of coaching them through the process. It's a journey. So where can you take it with AI, or what can you do? A couple pointers screamed out to me. One, if you have rules around how things should be done inside your environment, that's Azure policy. And then you cover every scenario, whether someone goes into the portal in an emergency outage and does something, or if they're using Bicep because, hey, you know, some random team over there just wants to use Bicep or Terraform. So that would always be my starting point. Then to your question, Steve, of how to answer it in the age of AI, I've had limited success, but I think you have to pick your area. So to Robin's point, you know, like with landing zones and that sort of thing, pick something like that where you understand the inputs and the result. You can then get a really good pathway to do it. To do it more broadly, not yet. I think it's going to be possible, but at the moment I haven't had personal success, so I'll pass over to the group.
Yeah, we've got AZ policy in Azure to protect ourselves from a lot of those things, but to move it closer to the keyboard, right? I want to get there. The minute they tried to deploy to Europe, no, it red flags, squiggly lines, it does something, you know, to that extent to say, no, that's not going to work.
Then you're looking at the code side, so that's your open policy framework. That's your angle in from that angle, and again, that's effort to set up as well, right? So, but OPA would be how I'd approach something like that.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, because we've got the same deal. We've got a lot of Azure policies on the platform. So it's not until the apply that people really get the, oh, sorry, you cannot do that. And we've got a lot of self-service. So I was just actually about to ask something like that. Is there a way or a skill to quickly say, go and investigate my Azure policies and convert that into OPA and let me put that in my like required pipelines? So like Jeremy, like you were saying, maybe they can never spin up their own state file because certain things can't be done. I don't know if Opal would pick that up, but yeah, you know what I mean. Is there any way to do that? And Stu, you put your hand up, so maybe you've got an answer.
A couple things. So I don't have a specific answer to that question, but Stephen's got a present for you coming in 2.10 of AZ API. There's a pre-flight is basically, I don't know if you've used pre-flight before. What that basically does is if you're using AZ API, it will actually check policy and it will check it during the plan stage. And if you're using separate principles for plan versus apply with different privileges, the new thing coming in 2.10 is it can now run read only, whereas previously needed write. So that's kind of that's one way where you could catch it, but it's still at plan stage. To your point about converting policy to OPA, actually agents in my experience are pretty good at that. And yeah, that is the sort of thing that I'll chuck your AI at, and I mean, I've had relatively good success there. So, yeah.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, I was just going to echo the thing about policy because, yeah, I bounced off one at a customer's environment this week. They said, oh, can you, for some front door endpoints, can you put those into detection mode now because there's another WAF that's taking care of that? Apparently, no, I can't because there's a policy stopping me from doing it. But the other thing that sprang to my mind, sorry, just I was hearing Jeremy saying, some people who are new to DevOps and Terraform and the like. Back in the, I age myself here, back in the .com boom, ultimately that's what gave us CSS. Was a bunch of irregular developers suddenly had become web developers, and they were like, "Why are we repeating all of this stuff here? Can we not have a layout, theming thing that's common for everything?" So, and we're seeing that with we did see that with a lot of the Terraform modules and stuff, but now, as pointed out, everyone's now writing their own modules. It gets a bit more fragmented.
Apparently, there's no one shoe that fits them all.
And that's both a good and a bad thing. I mean, I cut my teeth on Perl programming language, and they say, there's more than one way to do it. The end of Perl should be, and about 6 of them make absolutely no sense.
Sometimes I sit in my home, but in my virtual cubicle and go, I'm sure somebody's figured this out. But every now and then it's nice to hear that others are like, no, not yet.
Yeah. But there are times when you just got to tell people, like, you don't reinvent the wheel. Right? There's already several ways to do this. Like, you don't need to come up with your own. I don't care how clever it is.
That is the hardest thing, that it's easy to create code and it's difficult to maintain and establish good taste. I think that's God, who was it? Scott Hanselman, I think, was talking about it on the Scott and Mark show. And they've written various blog posts to the ACM about developing preceptorship and so forth within technology to help people develop that architectural taste. It's a challenge, I think, in the AI era, where it's too easy to make stuff.
Yeah.
Stu, do you want to show that demo?
I can do.
You've
Sure.
gotten it working faster than mine wants to run up.
So I wasn't sure I'd be able to do it because it takes a while for this to deploy, but when Stephen mentioned it. So context is the link which I've shared in the past on this chat about shared application gateways and the challenges of being able to run it with a Terraform plan. I don't know if I've got a good README. Let me have a look. We'll soon find out. There is something in there already. No, not really. Okay, but you've seen the problem before, I presume, because many of you are terraformers, where you basically run the gateway, you make a change, and then you get this horrible plan basically come through because everything is a list. And so what the recent versions of AZ API basically allow you to do is it's got some list handling properties inside it, and I'll just walk through how it works. So I've got some prerequisites, which I'm not going to run because I already have. So just to make sure I've got the various resources in place. I've got some deployments, so I've got the code which drives the app gateway is here. It's calling a WAF policy, which is currently pinned to something in my personal area, but it says upstream proposal with AVM as well. And the same thing for the application gateway a little bit further along. Here it is. And you've basically got the normal stuff that you expect. So application gateway, well, I'm not fundamentally changing the architecture. Every single application gets distilled down to a common set of lists. You can't change that. What I have got inside here, though, is an approach where I can break down applications into separate files. So if we take this dev example, I've got one application here, which is just a makeup API thing, which I think is just pointing to HTTP bin. And you see the usual stuff inside there, and you see the usual stuff inside there. And then inside of locals, which I'm not going to share because it's just curly and unnecessary, it basically is just taking these various YAML files together and smashing them into those lists so that you've got that simple transfer into the keep going to the wrong place, into the list of stuff here. So deployment, so I did this earlier so you don't have to watch things initialize, but literally at the start of this call, this is what I was running. So you get the usual init, happy stage, you get the plan, and it will basically, you'll get the usual stuff coming through saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And then you get the apply, which is what takes a while. So it takes 12 minutes to do this. And then we start to get onto the important stuff. So one of the things that's always important to do when you're writing modules or solutions, I always think, is to make sure that after you run the apply, run a plan, to make sure you get a good idempotent run. So you should see that. So and we can run it again now just to prove the point that that's still working. Hopefully, I haven't broken it while I've been talking. I don't think I did. So then while that's cooking away, then what we can do with this approach, with this YAML-driven approach, is we can literally just remove and add things by adding YAML files. So you see all I'm doing here is just moving a file. So yeah, you see there's no changes there, so we can do that. And API dev, there's a .back turn up there. So now if we run a plan, we should have a relatively clean plan. And this does scale up to multiple. I'm only showing 2 here, but I've done it with multiple 3s, 4s, and so forth. And it's pretty tidy. It's not perfect, but it's pretty tidy. When it runs, cooks away. Let me just get rid of the terminal at the bottom so we've got a bit more space. So we see we're basically removing a request routing rule, a probe, so the various items, but just one, and it's doing it in a sort of way where you can come through and can read it pretty cleanly. So then you can apply it. Hopefully it's going to work. I haven't tested this. And I can show you the portal, but yeah, you just trust me. If you want to see it actually working with the portal as well, I've recorded some demos of this. I think I did it for Global Azure this year. So if you go searching for that, you'll find me running the process. And then just while they're cooking, so again, to re-add an application, this is just a case of copying the file back again, and then rerunning the plan, and you can add additional applications, just add more, just kind of like this. So you can just scale it out, and yeah, and then you've got teardown. Let's just see, has it finished cooking yet? Should land this fairly quickly, a few seconds.
Just as fairly quickly as my stuff is landing still.
Yeah. Should be about 30 seconds, I think, to do this. Not that I've done it a few times already.
While we wait, your badge on your Git icon 4K plus scares me a lot.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is. Shall we have a look? It looks like I haven't Git ignored my VM. Yeah, that's a bit silly of me. Yeah, you can see it's not Git ignored. Maybe I should do that. Yeah. Okay, so then that's done a change. And yeah, so if we re-add the application, which is just copying the file back again, then we should just re-add to run a plan, and you should see just the one things to add back. And I'm not going to run the apply because yeah, but you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, I've scaled this up to not just one or two applications. I've got this sort of running with 20 or so, and you get sort of nice clean. So you can see it's adding back just the specific items. It's not touching where David does. So when you have multiple items, what you basically see is you get more of this unchanged attributes stuff. Remembering it is still one list, so fundamentally you can see sort of neighbor stuff there, but it is very clear what it's doing. It's adding this particular one. It's adding this particular one, this particular probe. It's adding that particular listener.
So this solves the problem where you basically see like it's removing everything and adding everything at the same time again.
Totally, yeah. So what it's basically doing under the hood, if I can navigate to the actual implementation. Let me see if this will work. There we go. That seems to have gone it. So this uses a new feature in Azure API, which I think landed in 2.8, which I contributed, which is this sort of list handling capability, which basically what it allows you to do is nominate so a list is obviously like an array, so like a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whereas it allows you to identify a particular attribute of an object in the list to say that is the key, so that it kind of turns it into a map. And the nice thing about a map is then obviously it's list insensitive. You can move things around and it doesn't care because everything is sort of indexed by the key, not by the items in the array. And that's basically under the hood. This is it. It's as simple as that. It was actually added for another purpose, but when I sort of saw it, it's like, oh, that might fix the app gateway problem, and it turns out it does. So
I think this is then as similar as the problem that you have with Azure Firewall with rules where you change one IP address and then it's like, you also see like the difference. It's like, and if you don't have like 100 rules in a rule set, then nobody knows anymore what it does in your plan, which is, I guess this method could also solve that, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's the age-old problem of everything's a list, and the order in which those things is in the list matters. So if you've got a list of 10 items and you remove number 4, well, everything from 5 becomes 4, and so Terraform wants to destroy and recreate everything from there onwards. And this is actually quite clever in that it solves that. It's only it only changes what's actually changed, not just the order in which it appears.
Yeah, exactly, because with some resources it doesn't really matter, right? It's just instant. But when you have like this gap in between, you can't have this on production. On dev you can do this, but on production, you need to like plan this at night and have maintenance windows, etc. That's a big pain in the ass.
Yeah, things like App Gateway and Azure Firewall, the order in which things appear actually seems to matter. For other things, not so much.
It was actually added for a similar issue with diagnostic settings. And there's another property besides list unique ID property. There's another one. I can't remember what the name is of that. But
that's the one where you get back more than you sent.
That's right. Yes. So you submit something to Azure, like for instance, I want to enable diagnostics on a storage account, but I only care about the delete thing. So you set that particular metric to enabled, or log to enabled. But then from Azure, what you basically get back is all of them with the other ones with the enabled flag set to false. So you then end up with a sort of perpetual drift, and the simple workaround is just to add the other ones to your Terraform code, and it stops the drift. But it's kind of annoying. But yeah, this was introduced to help with diagnostic settings in AVM modules as they shift towards Azure API.
But yeah, there you have it. Then you would have to switch to Azure API for that specific resource.
Which theoretically isn't the worst, because Azure API is not just a gap filler. So don't just treat it as second class. I will always praise that from the top of the hills.
Of course not, but when you already use like a specific public module that is built on Azure M, then you would have to completely switch away from that module, because I mean that if you want to keep using that module, that would not be possible, or the maintainer would have to switch to AZ API. And if you don't have the influence over that, then you're in a pickle. You either have to, just it's either you leave it as is, or you start like forking the module yourself and switching it to AZ API.
And that's why sort of I've pushed this upstream into AVM, because that is the opportunity for the community to collaborate on these sort of things. And if anything is going to be the canonical store, then that should be it. I mean, that's where the subject was talking about brownfield earlier, where we're talking about importing resources. That's where that gets quite powerful, because the AZ API provider can also import resources directly from Azure RM without redeploy. You can't go the other way directly with the provider. You can take an Azure RM. You can use a move block basically inside your code to say, hey, this is your Azure RM resource, and this is now the AZ API equivalent, and then it'll do it without redeployment.
You can even do it with the VS Code extension if you have it. You just highlight things and migrate them over across providers. And again, AI is going to help you here if you have the registry docs and all that.
Yeah.
One more thing before I kind of close with the demo, since it's tidying up and finishing up here. For the skilling question, let's say that all this brownfield and greenfield is handled. Taking like 5 steps back, do people think DevOps is replaceable, in the sense of, do you think there is a day that you can hand everything off to the agent? I'm not talking in terms of, oh, like Robin, Stu, Jeremy are all gonna like lose their jobs, but rather you're like orchestrating DevOps across a variety of organizations and situations, and you've basically deferred that mental model into the hands of a fleet of agents that essentially serves as like a platform team within our own organization. Do we think that that's a aspirational world we're headed towards? Do we think that that's something that still is ways off? Certainly, I think it can be scary to imagine that AI is managing your changes, or that your application could go down on a launch day because the AI just said it was confident about something that it isn't. But curious what people's thoughts are.
Yes.
Yes, I'd agree. Yeah. I think what we're missing is the guardrails. I'm going to use the latest buzzword, harness. But it's that framework around how the system operates, which gives it that those sort of, no, you're not going to make a change on the day before release, or The other aspect is, how do you then surface up the information back to the person? Because I still fundamentally believe it should be a human approved workflow behind it, which is basically saying, okay, this is what you want to do. This is the delta between current state and future state. This is what's going to change. It doesn't necessarily have to be shown as code, but the nice thing about code is it is very specific, and the flip side of English is ambiguous. It doesn't necessarily have to be if you could visualize it in a better way. But I think DevOps is going to change substantially. I still can't decide if we're going to have this intermediate layer or what that looks like.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, do people think this is still going to be okay, even in a world where, I mean, what about like the sticky on-prem, like edge hybrid models, or like some of the weird like private cloud? Like, we still think that this is going to span everything, or is it sort of like the neat and tidy places will be able to do this, or do we think
I don't think we're quite there, partly because in the real world you have integrations with third parties that your AI doesn't necessarily know about. Again, something I've sort of looked at this week was Azure Front Door and Redshield, and we're getting some very weird behaviors out of it. And ultimately, it was the human that solved it, because the AI had no freaking clue what was causing the issue, and he kept assuring me this is definitely the problem, and I'm like, it definitely isn't the problem, but because it didn't know anything about the Red Shield side of the integration we were working on, it was utterly hopeless trying to figure it out.
And how confident are you that it is going to do the right thing, how it is supposed to do it? And that confidence is, in my opinion, still far away. That I would be confident enough to say, hey, let's go. You do
You're
your
saying
thing.
that the AI is sitting in the Dunning-Kruger effect. Its confidence outweighs its competence.
Yeah.
I think yeah, that's where you're using an AI to drive something which presents something to a human in a form which is understandable in terms of this is what I'm going to change, and describe it in a way which is unambiguous, and then that actual change is deterministic. So it's like you feed a PR, and the PR shows what the diff is, and whether it's code, I don't know, but I think that final mutation, I think, has to be deterministic to be able to trust it.
I think one of the biggest challenges, to answer your question, Steve, in my opinion, is we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things, but no standards, no framework. We're not all following a pattern. And so I don't know how many people, 20 people on this call, I bet we're doing Terraform 20 different ways. And so I think the issue is that, well, like Robin, you're talking about how you've trained your model, but you couldn't take that model and give it to me because it knows nothing about how I would do it. And so I think we've got a lot of maturity to go in our DevOps space before we're going to be able to actually share a lot of what we're doing. It's the old thing where in the past I've given somebody a script that does exactly what they need to do, but they have to trust that script to feel confident to run it. That's where we're at in Terraform and DevOps processes, I think. So training models and doing all these things is getting us there, and we're going to get there eventually. But in general, like even and I know you love the AZ API. That's different than all of the other providers out there. AWS doesn't have anything like AZ API, and so even the
Cloud Control API, I mean, not that it covers the same amount. Just
yeah, and so what I'm saying is even the brands are coming out with new ways to control their own infrastructures because they're seeing that the original, like Azure RM, the original style is too slow, for example. That's part of a maturity that we're going through right now. Until it gets there, and until we're all saying, yeah, there's kind of one way to make modules. There's kind of one way to consume modules. There's kind of one way that we find is the best practice to do all these steps. I think it's going to be hard to say that we've gotten to the place that you've asked, which is 100% trusting of AI and those skilled up AI capabilities to do what we need it to do. Because it's going to be unique for each company, each use, each person, and each style and framework that they're using.
Well, one thing I will say. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's the age-old competing standards problem. We have six competing standards. We need to come up with just one. We now have 7 competing standards.
Yeah, I would actually say 7 different ways of skinning the chicken, if you will, isn't a bad thing necessarily. Like, no one's production environment is down right now, or you're not on this call. And we didn't all implement it the same way. So in some sense, infrastructure is converging, but in some ways there is customization, right? Like on a fundamental level, people will still have their preferences on whether or not they're multi-cloud, whether or not they prefer microservice models, or they're trying to be, more of the traditional cloud compute skill set, and how are they kind of handling things depends on the organization, but at the end of the day, meeting everybody where they're at. I think that general architecture is there, and I'm sure we're all familiar with this as you kind of tinkered with AI. You can tell it, hey, I like this naming convention. Here are where like certain architecture diagrams live, so on and so forth. The real question, I guess, when I stand and kind of look at this is like, how many more people really need to know what's going on underneath that hood? How many people need to understand how to configure every single bit and piece of the infrastructure and all of that? One storage account would be that'd be a horrifying situation to be in, Stu, but yeah, maybe.
So a lot of my efforts in the last couple of years have been trying to build some sort of framework that I can use across different entities that would make it so that it's easy to consume, it's easy or automatic to generate. So I'm building a process that I'm dynamically generating, not with AI because AI is not consistent enough, dynamically generating individual resource modules in a consistent manner that allows me to use them in a consistent way. Well, that makes it so that AI is easily able to consume those. And so I don't have to train AI very much for it to consume those now because they're all the same. And so once I get to that point with MCP and the proper configuration, I can tell AI, go build me this, and it knows all of the dependencies. So if I say, go build me a hub and spoke model, it's going to know that there are dependencies for VNets, subnets, NSGs, all of that. But the input of that is very basic. The modules are dynamically generated right from the provider. And I move away from generating modules, from consuming modules manually, and I move to just regular language build and generate full Terraform infrastructures. But again, whole different way of doing it.
And I was just going to mention that, there's a lot of talk about things like the spec-driven development aspect. And what we do, we have a markdown file for our architecture, and you can use like the Azure MCP, which has the cloud architect skill, which is great, and the latest docs as well. And an AI assisted architecture in Markdown. And the template I use, I actually specifically say that, hey, write this so AI can read it more easily and then build it out from there. And then, like you're saying, you've already got existing resources or you've got your network structure and things like that. That's fine. Just give it the AZ CLI and then have that in a skill to say, go and check what I've got on my platform. And now go fill out this architecture template to make sure it fits into what networks I've got available and things like that. So it's pretty impressive what can already be done. Like the LLMs are amazing already, and we could probably remove our roles right now with what they have. But everyone's right. It's having the guardrails, the skills, the process flow, maybe the testing and everything in place to effectively have it work. And like you said, everyone's doing that uniquely, and there's probably no structured approach to that yet.
It's sort of like a new version of the portal destroy that some random guy did that took down the entire infrastructure or deleted the database. But now you just have random Claude agents being like, "All right, sure, I'll just force delete this entire thing." And you definitely need the right guardrails. And there's probably 50 new ways to attack that thing now as well.
And that's where you can break things up. So, just have read access for your architect to go and check what's on the platform. So that agent can only read and get the information that's there to help architect the next environment, and then pass that through to an agent that's going to go and test that and deploy it in a dev test environment. Then take it through to an agent that's going to go and do security validations
Yep.
to finally one that's going to make a PR. And then the human at the end can just go and validate, did that match that original architecture that we got approved?
But that's abstracted from the client, right? When you're building those modules right now, you're not telling the client, hey, make sure to do this and make sure not to do that. I think a lot of it is like you're building it in a way that the complexities are at least in my experience, and someone speak up if they think otherwise, is like if people aren't DevOps experts themselves, they just want to know that everything is working in like a secure and sort of break glass and proper architectural means. And there are patterns. There's not one size fits all for every single scenario, but there are general patterns that are there that we can sort of rely on and continue to trust.
I was going to write in the chat, like, if it's interesting now with like anti-gravity version 2, what Claude Code did. Now we've got the new Copilot IDE. None of these things show the code, or they've got the agent mode in VS Code now, and nothing visualizes really the code that's there. And if that's the step now, I can see that that's going to grow. Like the code matters, but it's mattering less to the human.
But then how do you present that translation in a way which is not ambiguous? That's always the challenge with Markdown, right? That you've got that. Programming languages were developed for a reason, and that reason was because it was difficult to take a business problem and turn it into something deterministic which could actually run. And yeah, I think the Markdown approach has merit, but I think for it to work at scale, it needs to be coupled with, again, I'm going to use the buzzword harness, which is your policies, or your as you said, Ross, your maker checker quality security pattern type approach. But I do love the idea of it sort of. Well, when I said everything ends up in the same portal, I was being a little bit cheeky, but when we all use the Azure portal, we all use storage accounts from Microsoft. Fundamentally, what's deployed in Azure is what's running the business. The thing is, how do you rationalize against that and maintain it day to day in a safe way?
And it's fun. Like it's pretty exciting times as well to
It is, yeah.
try and build that
Fun,
out.
fun,
Yeah,
fun and scary.
Yes.
I was always wondering, do you guys know if at any point where you may be able to, I guess, maybe control the agents a little bit more with like one of the providers, where you could almost make the agents and what their abilities could be doing, instead of having a markdown file to give it some logic, actually have something that's like saying, I want to have
Well-
these agents in this area, and with Terraform, I'm going to configure it so I don't know. I guess I was asking the question at Ignite when they were talking about the SRE agents, and it just sounds like it's basically you're in the portal with Copilot, like where you're in an area that's going to be the SRE area, and you're just sort of giving it prompts and stuff. But more or less, I would be interested in like actually putting stuff in code that's sort of guardrailing the agents to say, like you're able to possibly do these types of things in this environment in this controlled way, like you're saying, and giving it certain abilities.
I think one thing that we are staring at is how do you make sure that you have sources of truth to build confidence on. Our MCP servers are all the spine or backbone of them is the documentation that is on MS Learn. So I think that is absolutely going to be important as we move forward. And I don't see a world where I know that we're probably not visiting MS Learn as much as we might have a year ago, but I certainly think we still need to rely on the sources of truth there. So all of our MCP tools, all of that, like theoretically, right? You could look at the public Azure REST API specs and you can point at the Terraform Azure M provider, and you can understand the differences between how a service is naturally rolled out versus how it's authored in Azure M to some extent or another. Obviously, that's very context heavy, and your tokens will get eaten like popcorn, but you can understand that. So there are ways to kind of translate and contextually that knowledge store is massive for humans. We don't really do too well with that, but an AI can kind of start to understand, this pattern, that issue, oh, this is a thing that's in the provider that I need to think about.
I think in terms of the controls as well, so you've got multiple levels at a skill level. outside of SRE agent, then you've got, so a skill is not just Markdown, it can also be scripts for point one. Point two, when you're writing those skills, you can use the wider agent capability to use control it by hooks. So you can say, okay, pre-running this command or pre-tool use, I think, restrict the use of, say, Terraform apply and Terraform destroy. But I mean, obviously, that's still within that sort of non-deterministic bubble. So really around that, you want to wrap around, okay, well, this is the concrete identity that this thing is given, and it can only do X and Y. And then perhaps even more broadly around that, there's sort of maybe a sandbox concept where you're putting this thing in a location where you control, what its egress is and where it's able to use its API keys and all that sort of thing. So I think I can't remember who mentioned the maturity point earlier, but that's really key. I think yes, we can get there, but there's a whole bunch of engineering steps I think that we need to figure out and go through and find out the various t-shirt ways of doing this before we're ready to hand over the keys.
All right, 6 minutes over. Anybody got anything else before we close for the day?
It's getting quite late here on the Europe side, so.
Oh, geez, you're
Time's it
doing
there, Roland?
European
Where
time
are you?
zone.
It's Berlin time zone, so Düsseldorf, so it's after 1 right now. So alarm goes in 5 hours. So
Well, I hope you get plenty of sleep, and thank you all for joining. Appreciated the discussion. The Australia group tends to be smaller, but I always enjoy the more intimate conversations nevertheless. So
yes, it was
thanks
great.
all.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.